We've all heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. But the thing that we often forget is that it also takes one to support the mother.
Well, speaking of the village, this is our podcast. I'm Nicole Harlow.
And I'm Dawn Thompson. And we're here to connect you with the village of support you need from pregnancy to parenting.
So come on this journey with us as we build your village one episode at a time. Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, whatever you are listening. I am Nicole Harlow, joined by my lovely co-host Dawn Thompson, and we are here today talking to Patrice Payment, and she is a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder specialist. She's a therapist, an LPC, and we are so excited to chat with her today, specifically about perinatal anxiety. So Patrice, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your story?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I got into this work after being a stay-at-home mom for 6 or 7 years. And my kids were both in school and I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. And, I kind of realized that there was a need for it after my own experience with perinatal anxiety and depression, but mostly anxiety, and just really wanted to create a space for moms to feel like they were the most important ones in the room and like they had somebody who really understood them, and kind of also so that moms would prioritize that space and that time. And once I started looking into it more, I really found that there was this specialty in perinatal mental health, which I didn't even know about. And I really wish I had known about when I was going through it myself. But anyway, so that's kind of how I got to where I am. So I'm excited to be here.
Thanks. Well, I think this is such an important topic because prenatal anxiety is often missed. People don't recognize this anxiety piece, that it's part of the postpartum depression journey for many people. And we see it that anxiety manifest itself in so many different ways. And what do you think is like one of the most popular ways that people that shows up for folks?
I would say the thing I see the most, at least recently, is intrusive thoughts. And there's a lot more. I don't know if there's more of it or if it's just more recognized, but like perinatal OCD and just like, having these thoughts that you don't want to have that are just like scary, bad thoughts. And, whether that be that concern that they're going to hurt the baby or that something bad will happen to them or the baby or someone else in their family. And I think like it's also it's scary when they have those thoughts, but it's also like this thing of like, I'm the only one, something's wrong with me. When in fact it's just like a medical condition that you might have. It's something that it's not your fault and you can get help. And there is hope. Like that's probably one of the things I want to say like about anxiety and perinatal anxiety, but there is help for it. And, there are treatments that are actually effective and you can get better.
Right. I've seen it several times and including just recently. And that is a mom who is just petrified that her milk supply is not enough, even though she might have ounces and ounces and ounces that she's pumped already in the first few weeks. I see this so frequently. And it's like, you have to say to them, go open your freezer. You have plenty of milk. You're doing amazing, and sometimes that's what anxiety is or what that OCD looks like. They're like obsessed with pumping. But what happens is when you're obsessed with pumping or breastfeeding, or you're just obsessed with your milk supply being an issue, that it then creates other issues, right? Because now you're pumping too often and you're not getting enough sleep and you're right. Like it winds up being a snowball effect in a lot of cases. And I know even for me, I had intrusive thoughts and I didn't even know. And I was a doula.
Yeah.
Right. I had intrusive thoughts every single time I would be holding my baby at the top of the stairs. I would envision falling, or I would envision dropping the baby and the baby getting injured, or me getting injured. And like, it was every single time. And I had no idea. I thought that was just me being overly protective, or not even overly protective, but just protective, or like just worrying about my baby, because that seemed like a natural thing to do, but not recognizing that imagining hurting your baby or your baby getting hurt that's not normal.
Right.
To a certain extent, right?
I think it's really common, but it's not normal, right? Like, and
Exactly.
to go even a step further, like I'm one who did experience like intense intrusive thoughts, like to the point where everything around me like seemed like a weapon or a danger, or, you know, like I had visions of like the baby being in the washing machine and like being harmed, because our washing machine, when I was, you know, a first-time mom, was in our kitchen. So it was something that was like always there and open. It wasn't in like a separate space. And then like knives, I wouldn't use a freaking knife for the first few months after I had him, because I was so terrified that something was going to happen, or I was going to do something. Ceiling fans, like all of these things that are like normal household items that you would never ever think could be a potential danger, right? I've lived with them my whole life. No one's ever, you know, gotten stabbed in my house or like been put in the wash machine and, you know, or hung from a ceiling fan. And then, you know, weeks after your first child is born, you're experiencing this, and that's just in your house, which is supposed to be your safe place. And then for me, it was like, I didn't want to go out. I didn't want to be in crowds. There are so many dangerous things in crowds and unknowns and all of the things. So it was so debilitating. And that's where my anxiety then shot up. Right. So I think the spectrum of it, right? The spectrum of like where they show up, how they show up could be so varying for everyone. But anything that is obsessive or not normally what you think about, right? Perinatal period, that's what the intrusion is, right? Like that's where the intrusive thought comes in. So it could be very serious. It could be about milk, which is essentially not harmful, quote unquote, but it's still, again, making you into the state of being that you're not normally in. So if you guys are listening, hopefully you're listening while you're expecting. And if something does arise after baby's born or as it gets closer, you could recognize it, because that was the biggest thing, right? I'm a mom of 4. And now I'm not saying that intrusive thoughts just magically go away, but I can recognize, oh, this is an intrusive thought, and it doesn't spin me into debilitating anxiety like it did in that first time.
Patrice, what are the things that you see? I know I kind of asked the same question, but like, what are some of the variations that you've seen
Of intrusive thoughts or anxiety?
or just anxiety of how it often manifests itself? I know we just mentioned 2, but what are some of the other ways that what I want to do is, if someone's listening and they go, oh, that's me.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm having that and I didn't even put it together.
Yeah. Well, it can be so many things. I think, you know, one thing that just popped in my head is like we all think about postpartum depression as Brooke Shields. She was kind of the one who normalized it when she said that she was having thoughts about harming her baby. And I remember thinking, well, I don't think that, so I must be fine, you know, like even though I was struggling. So I think like just understanding that it's not just about that. Like there's so much more that it can be. I think it's also confusing because you're like thrown into this whole new world where you're not able to sleep like you used to be, or you're not able to do all the things that you used to do. So it's kind of like confusing sometimes as to what is just part of having a baby and what of it is actually anxiety, or, postpartum depression. So,
This, I think the rage one is such a good one, actually, because again, it's, I remember some of those feelings, like, I remember saying, to a client once who was saying to me, like, my baby is struggling and won't stop crying and is crying so much. And I literally feel like the urge to just, I have so much rage when it's happening.
mhm,
And I know that she just needs something from me. Like, I know logically what she needs and like what I can do. And I know I can help her. But for whatever reason, it makes me just absolutely livid. And like, it makes me feel like I could pick her up and throw her against the wall. And, we can dip into the families who do actually wind up doing things like that. I mean, shaken baby syndrome came from a very real place. And unfortunately, these are people that then go to prison instead of understanding that their mental health was not there. They were not in their right mind. They were not, we talked a little bit in a previous episode about psychosis, but obviously that's a whole other issue. But that rage can be frightening.
mhm.
And it's people don't associate that with postpartum depression, because we all think that postpartum depression looks like sad, weepy, crying, can't get out of bed, emotional, all these things. And we miss these bigger indicators of
Mhm.
what postpartum anxiety and depression looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. It just reminded me, that sometimes it can be like manifest in physical ways. Um, so like, which can also be confusing because your body is changing so much. But like the pit in your stomach, or like the nauseous vomiting, even, can
Wow. I
be
didn't know that.
anxiety. Yeah, because I think it's cortisol that is increased when you're stressed or anxious, and those things can like churn up in your stomach and actually make you feel sick.
Mhm.
So it can, and then there's like headaches, dizziness. A lot of people will just feel like a muscle tension, just like this, like freezing, not freezing, but like just like feel it in their body.
I
Mhm.
actually had spasms really bad in my back. Like every time my anxiety would shoot up, I would know it because my back would start spasming. And like I'd be just sitting on the couch and all of a sudden like shoot backwards. And yeah, it was totally like just a physical reaction. It was because there'd be days where I would be okay, like mentally, and I wouldn't get those. But every time I was overworked anxiously, like I would get those back spasms.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Like when you said that, I started to think about my own story where like my my mom's best friend was like, you just need to like get out of the house and like go walk with the baby. Cause I remember like just feeling like it was just everything was closing in on me, like, cause he wouldn't sleep and it was just crazy, like with my first.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Did
maybe
you feel
just,
like you had much support, like in those first weeks?
yeah, I had a lot of support. I never knew about doulas or anything like that, but, like, I had my mom actually living with us because she moved to Georgia to be closer to us because I was having her first grandchild, so she was like, she had bought a house but wasn't ready to move in yet, so luckily we had her there, um, and then my husband was really supportive, but at the time, I didn't really have a lot of friends who had kids, though, so
And I think that's a really important thing to talk about because typically, I'm not going to say every single time, but typically those are two people that are always around
Yeah.
when you're having a baby, right? Your mother or a mother-like figure and a partner.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, and you said this is her first grandchild, like they're dealing, I don't want to say with their own stuff, but this is also new to them, right? And
Yeah.
every baby is new to every family because babies are different. Like my fourth was like this anomaly that had all like surgical things and oral ties and stuff. And we had 3 chill, happy babies before that slept and were great. And then number comes around and you know, it's always a learning experience. So I think that's like an integral point to make is even if you feel like you have support, sometimes that like professional support, the doula or the therapist or just the postpartum doula to come in and like take care of the household, not just mom, not just baby, not just dad, but the entire household is so beneficial.
Well, and having somebody with experience, right? Because that's the thing we talk about all the time is how, you know, like moms, your mom usually has the best intention, but she raised maybe what, 1 or 2 kids, 2, maybe 3 kids at the most. And it was 30 years ago or more. You know, like, and it's not like what we used to have in time where people were having 9, 10 kids and they had deep experience raising younger children and having lots of children of their own. And, you know, there was this deep wisdom, right, that got passed along. And that is pretty much when you've got the average person having 2.5 kids over the last 40 years, that doesn't garner real experience, deep experience. When you have a doula who's had, you know, 300 clients, like their expertise is deep, you know, it's deep. But I want to go back to what you started to say about the kindness of someone just telling you just needed to get out of the house and go for a walk. Can you go back to that? Because I think we kind of diverted, and I think that's such an important part of your story.
Yeah. So I was saying a little bit about like with my first, he was not my sleeper. He, I shouldn't say that because he was sleeping well at night, but then during the day, he would take like these 20, 30-minute cat naps. And it was just exhausting because you didn't get a break during the day. But so I think that, well, in my story, just like backing up a little bit further, I had an emergency C-section with him. And so like everything that I had planned kind of went out the window. And people may not even realize, but things like that, any kind of like birth trauma or whether or not you consider it traumatic, like things that happen during the birth that are like more challenging kind of make you more susceptible to postpartum depression and anxiety. And so from the get-go, like I had a hard time breastfeeding because I had a surgery, and you know, you can't position the baby in the same place because you've got this C-section incision. But so you know, I always thought I would nurse and it would be, I never thought it was going to be hard. And so that was challenging. And then I think like he maybe just wasn't really getting enough to eat. And so he was never really satisfied. And so like he just, I mean, I don't know. He's still my like anxious boy. He's 12 now. So I don't know if it's just, you know, inherent, but like he wasn't sleeping. So things were just so hard. And like having my mom's best friend like just say like, you don't have to like do this like big grand thing. Just get out of the house, put the baby in the stroller, go for a walk. And if you can do that every day, like you're going to feel better. Not that it's going to solve all your problems and it's going to be easy from there on, but just like getting out and moving. And I'll never forget that. Like it was just really helpful in a lot of ways.
The fact that that seems so simple, but it's certainly one thing that everybody could probably do in most cases, right? Just get out for a minute,
Yeah.
and get that physical activity, even if it's just 15 minutes.
I think also like nature is super grounding, and it puts
Yes.
you in that present moment where there's, you know, beauty to look at and experience, and there's sounds, and there's just different sensory aspects that bring you into a different place other than your four walls that, you know, is drowned in like familiarity and, you know, nothing that will take you out of your head, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. There was something I was going to say about that. Oh yeah. Like often with anxiety, we just say like, do the opposite, do something, like, because if you're just sitting there, like all in your head, like you're just gonna, it's like that snowball we were talking about earlier. It's like one little worry becomes this big, huge thing that feels like insurmountable. And it's like, you've gone from worrying, well, what if the baby's cold, to what if the baby's dying because I don't have them wrapped up well enough and they're going to get hypothermia and like blah, 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 blah. So just getting away from the environment, like you were saying, like is really, really helpful. And it's not just about like, it's about the movement, which is great, but it's just like removing yourself from that like situation.
You're making me think about my kid who is autistic, and whenever she's in this like anxiety spike, I can see it, you know, I can see her drifting up. And a lot of times we've learned that we can stop that progress up if we can switch what she's paying attention to or what she's thinking about, right? Like we might go outside, or for her, sometimes it was like, let's just get one of her favorite shows on because it will work to stop the thinking process and switch which side of the brain she's living in. And, or sometimes it was just physical touch, right? Sometimes just hugging someone, right? Like, I mean, if you're starting to spiral and you see yourself starting to spiral, you can ask someone for a hug. Ask your partner, like, I need for my daughter was also about the pressure, right? And so people don't understand like that kinesthetic response to anxiety can help, you know, and someone who's having a panic attack, right? Like people a lot, again, they think, well, I'm not having panic attacks, but you might be, you know, and if you are, there's different ways to break that cycle in the middle of it. Deep breathing, you know, I mean, there's when we could go on and on about a list, but it's really about just getting your brain switching sides, like, or switching topics or thoughts. And
well, so a modality that's really, really useful is like tapping, EFT, because it puts you, you're touching yourself, right? You're tapping. It puts you in a relaxation response versus a flight or fight response. So it's literally doing that, right? And it's one of the modalities that I use all the time for myself and my children now that they're getting to the point of like toddler tantrum life. You know, tapping's been something that we use in our household a lot. And unfortunately, I didn't really know about it when I was going through the thick of my anxiety, but it's something now that I train in various, you know, even homeschool groups I've done some trainings with tapping, because it's such an easy technique and you don't need anything but yourself, right? Like just knowing where the points are and your own hands. There's no other like extra thing. And you could do it anywhere, right? Even a lot of the stuff like, you know, you can't do deep breathing with your eyes closed and like meditate while you're driving, right? You can't do certain things while you're driving, but you can sit there and tap on certain points that can bring you back into that moment. So if you're listening and you're like, what the heck is tapping? I'll have a video in the show notes for you to click on.
yeah,
I actually have a tapping video on my website, and often I'll tell my clients about it and send it to them. And I had a client who was pregnant with her first, and I told her all about it. She got into it. She got really excited and started using it. And her husband, when she would start to get anxious or get like activated or whatever, he would be like, maybe you need to go do that thing.
Love the husband.
I
That thing,
know.
you know, that you do that fixes you.
Yeah.
Go
Right.
do it.
It fixes
I
it.
know. So I have to share that with people because I'm like, it works. Like, and if you've never heard of it before, it can sound a little woo-woo, but it works, and there's science behind it. At Nicole, you know, like you can tell me more about that. But like, I mean, it does actually activate that nerve in your brain that helps you to calm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and there's lots of other things, but I do like tapping because it's so like easily accessible, like you said. Like you don't have to go through the whole thing, like, but you can just tap like I think you taught us when I took your class, like there's like a spot on your wrist or whatever. You can just kind of tap there, and like you can be sitting in an interview and do that and just kind of help regulate yourself a little bit, you know?
Yeah, there's something. So tapping, again, if you're listening and you've never heard of it, it works on the acupressure points. So lots and lots of years of knowledge there. And there's certain ways that your nerves run in your body called meridians. And that is where the points are derived from. So just by simply activating these points by tapping on them, allows your body, your nervous system to shift out of that, you know, high intensity fight or flight response that we often create in our minds versus having a bear coming to attack us, right? So again, there'll be a video like to fully discuss in the show notes, but it's something that again, there's no harm in doing it. You can be any age. You can tap literally for any physical, mental, emotional, social reason. So it's really a good technique that can support a lot of different things.
You know, OCD kind of behavior, like obsessing about, I was saying about breast milk or something like that. And then we talked about having, you know, that what intrusive thoughts looks like and rage might look like. Is there anything else that you feel like makes a huge difference or just something you see frequently?
Yeah. I mean, this isn't necessarily anxiety related, but it's definitely relevant as just like mom guilt. And just like, I'm sure you guys can attest to that. Like just the whole like feeling in a couple different ways. Like one I hear a lot is like not loving every moment of motherhood. And then like you feel so guilty about that, but it's not really realistic. You know what I mean? Like
It's not.
this like not Pinterest, but like this Instagram mom version of the mom that we see out there. And it's like
It's
nobody,
curated.
yeah, nobody can
Curated. Yeah.
that person all the time. Like even
Yeah.
those people that are the influencers that are like that. Like so I think when we don't live up to that standard, like we have guilt and you know it can also go as far back as like your own mother relationship, you know, growing like just we all have this like expectation of what we thought motherhood would be like, and when things are not like that, then it can just be like really saddening and you know make you just feel horrible. And my point is just that like there's not like this perfect mom out there you know what I mean, and like this mom who can do it all. And it can start from like the very first moment you have your baby. And like I always try to like mostly with friends like go back and tell people like what your baby really needs is for you to provide nurturing for them and to protect them from like you know a roof over their head, and all those other things like they're going to be okay if you don't get it right the first time or the second or third time, like they're going to be okay. So like just kind of learning how to let some of that go, which is the challenge with anxiety, letting things go, right? So Yeah, but I think that's like another big thing is just this whole like persona that's not attainable, like always
Yes.
talk about is it Marsha, not Marsha Brady, but the mom on the Brady Bunch, like that's just not like, and she had a housekeeper, so she had
Right.
right?
She had Alice.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't think that most people are watching the Brady Bunch. The people who are having kids right now are not watching the Brady Bunch
No.
or even understand. I was
Right.
going to reference June Cleaver, which would
Yeah.
again age me even
Yeah.
more. But just recognizing what you're saying about that Instagram photo or that Instagram mom that you've been following that seems like, she seems like she's just got it all together and she's not having any, like, I'm envisioning, those first few days where you're sitting there trying to nurse and you're crying, your hair is going in every which direction and you're leaking, you're sitting there leaking and your nipples are cracked and bleeding. And like, if you didn't see that coming,
Yeah.
it can be overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And it can feel like you are just a failure. And it's not true. And listen, some people have easier time than others. There is no question about that. But there's so many variations of people not understanding how birth impacts our postpartum situation. Like, I think about this all the time. I'm kind of obsessed about it, actually, is how many women are getting induced right now. It's something in the 70% range.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I think it's even more than that since the ARRIVE trial, but we don't have statistics yet. But so many people are getting induced at 39 weeks. And whether they have a straightforward induction and they have a vaginal delivery, or it takes them 3 days and they end up in a cesarean, they still have been pumping their body full of IV fluids the whole time that they're on Pitocin.
Mm-hmm.
And this has a massive impact in the postpartum period. And people aren't talking about it. It's like, these are the things that make me crazy about when women, when providers say, hey, we should induce labor and here's some of the risk. You have a risk of C-section, like all these like immediate risks.
Yeah.
But we aren't talking about the long-term risks or even the short-term risks of just a few days of what pumping the body full of fluid does to the breastfeeding journey.
Right.
Right? It makes it really difficult for that baby to latch on to the nipple because you're so engorged that your nipple is practically flat. And now it only takes a couple of nursing sessions with your breast being overfilled and your baby trying to latch onto that nipple to cause damage. Right? Like, so that matters. If someone just went into labor and had their baby and they had no interventions, they didn't have an epidural, their experience is likely going to be much smoother.
Mm-hmm.
Their postpartum experience. And now that is not to shame anyone who chooses to do an induction or get an epidural. That's not what I'm talking about, because I think everyone should have the right to do all of those things for whatever reason. But what you don't understand is the risk that's associated with it. And like, there's people say, well, don't say all those negative things, right? Because then that you can manifest that if people who believe in that sort of thing, right?
Right.
But I think it's amazing what could happen if you understand, like, these things are possible. It's possible that you won't be able to sleep because you have so much anxiety. Mm-hmm. Right? Even when your baby's sleeping, you may not be able to sleep. This is the thing that happens. You may not be able to breastfeed really well because your breasts are so engorged, right? Like, there's so many things that, excuse my language, but just fuck with us.
Yeah.
Right? There's so many things and they all go together.
Yeah. And we do ourselves a disservice by not talking about it. Like, I get why we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to scare everyone away from having a baby.
Right.
But like, when you don't talk about it, then when it happens, you think something's wrong with you or you did something wrong.
Yes.
And it's like, no, it's not your fault. Like, and this is what is expected to happen when XYZ, you know, but like, because it's just so just not talked about, then it's like, and then I see so many women who are afraid to admit like these intrusive thoughts and that kind of thing, because, and I've heard a lot about, I mean, I don't even think we want to get into all this, but like all the like fear of people taking their baby away, you know, and like,
Yes. If you tell
yeah,
someone.
yeah, yeah, and so then they're suffering in silence, and that's the scary, like really sad part about it all. But I mean, I know there has to be a balance. Like, you know, you can't just, I guess we could create this crash course in babies where we like go into all the worst possible things that could happen. I don't know if
Right.
people would sign up for it though, right?
Now, I mean, listen, I get accused of fear mongering all the time in my social media. And you know, it's hard. It's hard to balance because
Yeah.
I do not want to scare people, but I want to activate them. I want them to understand that this system is not built the way we need it to work for us as
Right.
women, as mothers. It is not, it has become a business model and a financial structure. And that financial structure has to continue to build that financial institution because
Mhm.
that's what it is. And it is not best for us. It is not what's best for us. And so I want people to understand that. But like, how do you help them understand that and just be like, everything's great. I mean, you just gotta, you know, just get educated, like, right? Instead, I'm like, no, this is the shit that's happening. This is
And I
happening.
think it goes back to, no, we don't need to tell moms or educate moms on all the worst case scenarios and overload their brains. But if they invest in the support that knows them and can
Right.
recognize them happening and can ask the right questions and can give you the right information in the moment, that's the game changer. That's the difference, because they have all the worst case scenarios and all the information and all of what you need in those moments to prevent birth trauma, to lower your risk of C-section, to lower your risk of PMADs, to do all those things to support you in every single moment through pregnancy, birth, postpartum, without you overloading your brain with all of the worst case scenarios, because that's not helping anyone.
No, it's not.
Right.
But having somebody who is in place there to help circumvent some of the things that could lead to these issues is critically important. And maybe that's not, maybe you don't have the money to get a doula. Maybe you don't have the financial wherewithal to really build up your village. And I get that. I think that's a reality for a huge number of people.
Mhm.
But there are lots of economical resources out there, discounted resources, whatever. But also there's a lot of great books out there to read and things like that to just prepare yourself.
I also think, like, I'm going to push back a little bit, and I know we're nearing the end of this, but I'm going to push back on that point because, listen, I have been in every financial debacle throughout my motherhood journey. Like, I will tell you, first child, I had $10,000 saved specifically for me to be out of work, and I was freaking prepared and all the things financially. And then I had the worst postpartum anxiety ever in my life, right? And that money did nothing, quite frankly, because I had already hired the doula. But my second baby, I remember it was unplanned, and I was like, I'm on the phone with my mom, like, holy shit, how can I do this? I don't have any money saved up. We're in a different position. My husband had just, switched jobs and all the things, right? And I can't even tell you about 2, 3, 3 and 4, but it all worked out, right? Like, it literally all worked out because I was freaking out about daycare costs because I was working in the office, and don't kill me for saying this, but like, I didn't manifest a global pandemic, but my son was born 2 weeks after COVID lockdowns, and I never had to work into an office again. So I didn't need daycare costs for 2 kids at that point, right? Like I could have never projected that when I was 8 weeks on the phone with my mom crying about my financial situation. And then it all worked out. But my whole point to this is too, it's prioritizing. It's not, oh, I don't have the money. It's, I don't want to spend the money on this because either myself doesn't understand the benefit, or my partner or my family is giving me shit about hiring someone when they could step in. And right, we talked about that with you, Patrice. Like, yes, your mom was there, your partner was there, but you were still dealing with this because it wasn't a professional support. So if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, I just don't have the money, I can't spend thousands, like, can you not? Or is there ways that you could and you're just not prioritizing that? And it's not to like down talk anyone at all, but it's the reality of, okay, if you invest in the support, the amount of time, energy, love, like happiness, joy, sleep that you could get is not quantifiable monetarily either.
That's true.
So think about it that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Patrice,
right. I actually just did a TikTok video on priority. I mean, can we normalize investing in our birth and postpartum period? It's like everybody normalizes spending thousands and thousands of dollars on a wedding, which, by the way, is now an average of $60,000 to $70,000 is the median for a wedding in the United States. And I know lots of people do it for a lot less than that, but the reality is like you could literally have both a birth and postpartum doula in person for $5,000.
Yeah.
$5,000. Like, you could do that.
The thing I think about is, okay, if you're not going to pay for it now, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to have to pay for it later? You know, like with your mental health and physical health and all the things that can, you know, like, so why not go ahead and be proactive,
right?
And not have to suffer and have like this, at least.
And now, mind you, like use us as an example. We're all three of us. We're saying this because we didn't do it,
right?
Because we didn't understand the benefit. Like, I'm saying this because I'm not saying this because I eventually became a doula, and I think that, you know, like it's self-motivated. And obviously I have Birthify, right? It's a platform that we've tried to make it more affordable for people. That's the whole point, and still get the expertise that people need without, we're not in person, we're virtual, but like even that is hugely beneficial, just having someone who guides you. But my point is that it's, we all three of us are telling you from experience. This is not a plug because we're in the business of it.
No.
We got into the business of it because we didn't have it.
Right.
When we were going through having our first children, and we saw, oh my God, that experience would have been so different if I just had the right support.
Right. And we had support. It wasn't that we didn't. I had birth
Right.
doulas. I just
I had
didn't.
an amazing husband.
Right. I didn't know that the postpartum piece of it was going, because I had this empowered birth. I was so freaking on top of the world. And then very quickly, under a lot of, you know, bricks that toppled right over me. So yeah. But like I said, it's about prioritizing, I think. So it's what.
And here's a quick plug for Be Her Village. Be Her Village is an online registry for services. So you can actually have family donate and contribute to an account that then you can spend on services like doulas and meal prep and all those things. And actually next week, I think, or is that later today with Eric?
Eric.
Yeah. So he's with a food prep company specifically for postpartum recovery. So I'm excited about that.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, Patrice, speaking of the village, what role besides the mental health therapist would you say is the most crucial for a woman to have in her village?
I mean, that's such a hard question. I think they're all so important. But when you first mentioned that, I was thinking having an OBGYN that really listens and like doesn't just see you as a number, get you in, get you out, like that actually screens for postpartum anxiety and depression, and that actually will give you the referral for the therapist or has a list of doulas that they can send you to. Like if they hear you saying that you don't have enough support in whatever area, you know, because they're the person that everyone has to go back to after they have the baby. So that's like the perfect gatekeeper, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I just think like having that relationship is just so important because like you already know them from throughout your pregnancy. You're seeing them so often that many women feel comfortable like really opening up to them, you know? So
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
want to mention that the Perinatal Resource Collaborative is actually actively working with providers. We just launched a program called the Perinatal Patient Resource Advocate Program to get resources into OB offices, pediatrician offices, and all those medical providers that are those gatekeepers to access this podcast, to access the Amongst the Village magazine, to be able to actually get recommendations for perinatal professionals in their area. So it's huge, huge, huge to have a OB that supports you, but we also recognize that not all of them have the capacity to, and we're helping get those resources in those offices as well.
yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much, Patrice, for joining us today. And we really appreciate you sharing your story and some of those, you know, things to look out for. If you guys have any questions about anything that we talked about today, just look in the show notes. And thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, thanks for joining us on Speaking of the Village. If you love today's episode, make sure to hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
And remember, you're not alone. We're here, we're listening, and we're all in this together because in our village, no mom walks alone.